everybody. Welcome to today's Change Leadership Conversations. And today I have with me Mohammed Chahdi. He's the head of America's HR for Dell Technologies. Thank you so much for being with me today, Mo.
Thanks, Yvonne, for having me. Glad to be here.
So Mo was supposed to be one of our speakers for the Change Leadership Conference that was supposed to come up May 2020, and we have had to postpone it because of all the crises we're going through with coronavirus, COVID-19 at the moment. We've moved it out to next year. So like many other organizations, we're having to pivot, learn the best way to respond to some of these changes that are happening to us. And that's what I have more to talk to us today about. At least let's talk about how some of these changes are impacting his organization and his leadership and what he's doing. But more, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
So, as in my job, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So, because otherwise I'm going to be standing here talking to you. No, joking aside. So I lead the America's HR operations team, and basically we do what I call kind of the life cycle operations work from an HR standpoint. That includes things like onboarding, offboarding, record management, making sure that whenever we have any of our HR transactions, that the operation side is taken care of.
Okay.
It's kind of the day job, and then I'm involved in some M&A work within the company. So divestitures and the transition services agreement that are involved within that. The way I see my job really is to make sure that the people component of what we do as a business is taken care of. And that means taking care of our people, making sure that our people's strategies are in place. And so we tend not to play within boxes in the company. And I feel that's a good thing. But look at it as bring value wherever and whenever we need to in order to make our customers successful in what we do.
So talking about boxes, if you weren't playing in boxes before, you definitely are not playing in any boxes right now. With all of the changes going on, we have a change leadership, believe that we're living in very disruptive times, fast-paced times, things are happening very quickly. And now with the COVID, that's only gone to show us how much faster things can happen and how disruptive things can get. So how has this affected how you are doing business, how you're leading, how your organization is operating? How these changes affecting you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm gonna be honest, it's hard to say from this kind of point of view today that we have a good grasp of what this has done to the business. And I'm talking, again, directly my teams all the way up to where we are as an industry. And it's an evolving situation, and I think, as we chatted briefly, it's very hard to deal with the big uncertainty of not being able to even predict what's probably going to happen for 6 weeks from now, right? And so it is evolving. But I do think there are certain things within our control that we really, in my view, are relatively simple to stay focused on and make sure you understand what those priorities are, understanding how they are impacted immediately, at least, in terms of the way things are evolving, and address those immediately. So let me start with the first and most, I think, visible thing that everybody has realized is it impacted our social interaction. And, we talked about social distancing. It started the conversation actually way back in Feb. In January, people were starting to talk about that. And so what helped us as a company, global presence, we have our technologies all over the work we do, and our solutions that we do for our customers are also available for us. It was a relatively simple transition for us to push all our employees into working remotely. We have been big advocates of work flexibility and remote work for the last 10 years, have been tried and failed into a lot of its aspects. So moving the gear to going from our percentages, I think we had about 65% of our workforce globally utilizing work flexibility in some form or fashion. The other way to look at it is 65% had the ability to work from home. And I know that's a huge luxury compared to where many businesses were, where they had, in some instances, 0% or very low percentages of their workforce could potentially be operational and productive from their homes.
I want to interrupt you there for a second,
Please.
so forgive me. You bring up a really, really great point. And it's all around being prepared for times such as this. And that's one of the things we talk a lot about in change leadership, about preparing leaders and organizations and professionals to lead change in today's disruptive business environment. The organization was almost prepared for a time like this. So not, you have business continuity plans, you have people working remotely. So what value do people need to place on preparing for the eventuality of things? Because people sometimes want to focus on the minutiae of things, business as usual. I just want to operate on a day-to-day basis as opposed to trying to plan ahead. So how do businesses or leaders need to start thinking ahead and forward?
Yeah, again, I think there's this whole BCRP, business continuity and recovery plans in place. The reality is what happened way surpassed that level. And I think, one example is people could plan for a daily disruption or a weekly disruption. We are talking into many months of potential disruptions. So I think it's fair to say that this falls into the situation where I don't know that a lot of companies had a pandemic scenario to this extent, planned out and ready to execute. And I don't pretend that Dell Technologies necessarily had one. I think this is one where it's kind of pushes a stress test on your values as a company and as a business. And so you kind of said it a little bit of where are your leaders standing today? What I think is interesting, and this is where we found ourselves, is when you're in a crisis, this is not the time to find new values and trying to create them for you. This is the time where you really have to make sure, ideally, that you already have that figured out, but it tests to what extent are you willing to commit to your values. And so one example of the notion of trust, we have that come up in a lot of the ways we kind of throughout the years when we were having conversations around work flexibility. One of the key factors we found is that what makes us successful in doing so and in having such a large workforce that leverages work flexibility is that there is this two-way street trust relationship established between the company, the employer, the business leader, and the team member that does their job successfully for our customers. And in this context, think of it in a crisis where you are forced to send your employees home because of pure safety reasons. Once that safety measure is achieved, so now you know that your workforce are safe, I think what kicks in is, do you now trust that they're still doing their best for your customer? They're still trying to navigate their obviously changes through, having to deal with their kids at home, having to care for their elderly. And I feel this is where that trust has definitely been challenged and stressed upon, and luckily, again, we've seen a surge in how our employees came through in terms of not only caring for the business and caring for themselves, but also caring for our customers and going way above and beyond. But I think that's, to me, the conversation of, do you have that trust with your employees today? And if so, how is that manifesting itself through these conversations and through these situations? And to me, that also goes into the other point of, are they trusting you also to have their best interest in mind? Again, this isn't one where you send an email and say, oh, you should really trust us. We have your best interest. Just go work from home.
Yeah.
Your job is safe. This is where, are they really feeling that trust? Are you taking care of them? Are their leaders on a day-to-day basis making sure that they are giving them the support and tools to be successful without necessarily going into this control mode of, now that you're home and I don't see you anymore, you need to prove to me that you're still doing your job. And again, that's just one scenario, but you get my point of.
Yeah, I do. And that's interesting because I had a conversation with Ann Kavukian, and one of the things that came up was trust. And we spoke about the fact that some organizations are now buying surveillance software to monitor their employees' productivity, and it comes back to trust. The quote I happened to have seen that day I was speaking to Anne was, they asked, how do you trust somebody? You trust by trusting them first. That's how you get their own trust. So how can organizations build trust with their employees? By trusting them first. So you really raise great points. I love that about value and culture, because while we may not be able to plan for every eventuality like the pandemic, nobody could have seen that coming. One of the things that will carry us through crises such as this is the culture that you've been able to build and establish before times like this. And there's that saying that crises do not make leaders, crises reveal true leaders. So talking about leaders, what are some of the change leadership skills that you think would be very important in times such as this? We've spoken about building trust. What are the ones come to mind for you?
I think, to me, again, the points here is around, so we talked a little bit about trust. How do you keep the optimism balanced with being realistic? And I think the bridge between the two sometimes tend to be called denial. If you want, as a leadership, you want to project that optimism, and optimism here, not just on an economy or industry level, but also on the personal, individual level, right? Of starting from you're going to be safe down to you're still going to be productive, down to, the economy is going to be okay, so there's less likelihood for you to lose your job. To me, these are one of the best qualities I think making a difference in these times is having and keeping an eye on the long term and the midterm of this crisis versus just the immediate crisis itself we're dealing with. The being realistic here is also not being in denial of how big of a crisis this is. And the reason that's important is it does inform the decisions you make on an immediate basis. And one example, again, going back to the analogy of having to shift quickly into working remote for a lot of businesses for the first time, I think what's being tested is how fast that companies actually realize that this is serious enough to start quickly acting on it and go, all right, we are optimistic that we're going to get out of this situation, but I think it will not be realistic for us to assume that we're going to get out of it without allowing our team members to stay home and do their job. And so you could easily see a wave of companies who went really early to say, send everybody work from home, and some others who did it 2-3 weeks later.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious as to what took these other companies 3 weeks. Granted, for some it was the simple, we don't have the tools to do it, we don't have the technology to do it, we need the security levels at our systems to be able to do that. But you'd wonder, and what you want to see in the leadership at that time is the ability to be agile between those two situations of, we're very optimistic, we're gonna still maintain our steady vision on what we can foresee in the future, hopefully with an optimistic view, but we're still going to be very realistic about, this is a time of crisis, and we are going to take immediate action as fast as we possibly can to ensure the safety of our employees, the safety of our communities, and so on and so forth. So to me, that's, like, I called out a few things, right? But to me, those are really the qualities that matters now in terms of dealing with something as disruptive as the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, I like some of that, the agility to be able to respond, open communication and being pragmatic, finding that balance, and optimism. How do you keep the spirits alive? And again, everything comes down to values. Even when you talk about agility, you talk about values again. How agile are you as a leader to be able to respond to the changes that are happening around you? Or are you being pushed to? Are you being reactive? Are you responding? Or are you even being proactive?
It is. No, you're right. And this is not, to me, like, crisis is never the time to start making new stuff up, right? This isn't the time to go and pick new values. And so this is where I feel what's going to be the biggest differentiator is how many people do have the right values to begin with, but also how many people stick to those in the time of crisis. And we've seen the unfortunate number of unemployment coming up. You can think of that. And again, a lot of these are very true and crude business realities. But when you think of that decision to make that's very hard. And as a business, where do you place your people into that scale of protecting your business? Do you act on them last or do you act on them first? And so again, in the last one, I think that we saw a lot of it come through social media, which was good and refreshing, is the fact that, and I think you called it out really well, it brought us together. This crisis, if it did anything, is it got the humane side out of us, whether we liked it or not. And that represented itself from the very typical cliche, you're on a conference call and your kids show up And suddenly, whatever your title is, whatever your position is, that drops, and you're just this human being who has a family, or pet for that matter, or what have you. And I think we've seen a ton of that happen in social media, which is fantastic, because that's where you kind of realize that teams become family in a way, and that's, to me, that's kind of increases. I know we talked a lot about emotional intelligence and how people needs to be cautious about, the emotional side of the people they're interacting with and managing. And I think this definitely will raise that up in terms of, at least at a minimum, the awareness of who the people we work with and interact with truly are, right? And beyond the surface, beyond what their title says, and how their appearances come across and what have you. And
Mm.
so that humane side of being a leader, I think, is definitely going to make a huge difference. And
Oh
I
yeah.
know there were a lot of articles about, again, your values are going to be tested, and the way you act and the way you react to this crisis will define who you are now, truly, not who you say you are to your
Yeah.
employees and to your colleagues and to your community, but who you truly are.
I know. I mean,
So
looking at our country as a whole, Canada, I'm pretty pleased when I look at our leadership. They've done a really great job. When I look across globally and how all different types of leaders are
yes,
acting, I'm pretty.
I couldn't agree more. I could. This is truly a moment to feel very proud as Canadian.
Oh,
It's
I'm really, really proud of our leaders. They've done a great job in terms of the way they've been able to respond to the change. Believe me, I'm watching the news, I'm watching their daily update, and I'm taking notes on leadership.
Yeah, yeah, no, pretty much. And again, like, it goes back to the same point. My question, and this is just kind of from a conversational standpoint, is those values did not show up with the
Mm,
crisis, and or were not adopted because of the crisis. Those
mm,
values were always there, and
exactly.
so that's what's really manifests itself. And to your point, the other side of it, the less fortunate side of the story is also on the same way. If any of the governments were acting in a way that makes us look, how their day type of things, that's also not driven by the crisis. Is driven by how the values of those governments were before even the crisis began.
Exactly. It's really, situations like this, I keep on saying it reveals the leader. So taking this on a whole different level, it's still the same level, we're still talking pandemic. I got asked the question, and I said my response to the question was, when all this is over, when the pandemic is over, the lockdown is over, we can expect to see that business is not going to be as usual,
Yeah.
but life may go back to normal. That's my take. I feel life will go back to normal. After a while, we'll go back to doing some of the things we used to do, but business is not going to be the same as usual. It's difficult to say now, but what's your projection in terms of how things will look? What do you believe or see to be the new normal?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I don't know that I would have a prediction per se. I think there are some realities in my view. Again, and being an optimist, what I've been challenged with is exactly what I called out: is appreciating and acknowledging the realities we are dealing with and going to deal with for the next few months, if not more. But also keeping an optimistic outlook into what could we learn out of this in
Mm,
terms of, things like agility, resiliency, ability to care for others, and all these things that I think will be very relevant. Not too long ago, we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution and digital
yes.
transformation, and these things seems to be very intangible,
Mm,
in terms of, everybody talks about disruption,
mm,
and there were some obvious examples to be thrown out there, but nobody could really point into the what and how. Well, guess what? This crisis gives us that. This
yes.
crisis gives us a tangible view, again, in a very pandemic situation, but still gives us what does disruption look like, and how having the right infrastructure to support your customers, to support your employees
Mm,
matters. And because that's been the biggest differentiator today of people who are for example, who had the least amount of disruption in their business is they had that resiliency built within their
Yes.
systems and infrastructure, and they may not have used it as often and as we needed to use it now, but that investment into the assets, the infrastructure itself, but also the investments into the culture that was made, it is what's paying dividend now. And I think that's, to me, to your point, what's going to come out of this to me is some of these lessons learned, because we don't have to talk to anyone at this point about what does working remotely mean. As an example, right? Everybody tried it, good or bad, and I hope more good than bad. But the point here is the notion of being productive in a distributed workforce or in a workforce that operates fully or the majority through technology. That used to be a concept for a lot of businesses. Now it's a reality, not because we like it, but this is a reality. And hopefully that open up a lot of opportunities for businesses who will look at this as a way to kind of start looking how they could add value to their customers through these technologies and have a much more focus on productivity and creativity and building those things like trust with their workforce to do what's right for their customers beyond, the four walls of an office type of thing. So that I see that as hopefully kind of a good outcome from these conversations. I feel like a lot of organizations will come out of this much stronger. There will obviously be, what I feel overused words, but the point here is, I think coming out of this, you will either know that your employer cares for you or you don't. And to me, hopefully, again, you're in the first situation, that builds your engagement, that builds your commitment to your employer and to their customers. And so that's to me where I feel there's going to be a lot of tested values versus intangible statements that goes on a worksheet. And that's a good thing, hopefully, for a lot of businesses. But
it is a good thing. It's testing our technology, it's testing our values, it's testing our leadership, it's testing our humanity.
It is.
It's testing everything. So here at the Change Leadership, we firmly believe that everyone is a leader. We believe that change leadership is no longer for the select few. It's no longer for that leader at the top or the person with the position or the title. It's something that we can all do from our sphere of influence, from our space. What would you say to somebody who is feeling a little bit powerless now? They're not too sure what to do. They don't have the position or the power they feel to do anything, whether at work or even with themselves.
Yeah, I don't know that there is a lot of people today where that statement necessarily is true, meaning that they are truly powerless. I think this is about perspectives and how you look at things and the impacts you have. I think the chain of events and the chain of value is, in my view, and that's back to your point of leadership and everybody being a leader. I think that chain is through and through, from the frontline employee to the customer, from the customer all the way up to the CEO. If that chain is broken, then to me, that's where your comment is, well, somebody doesn't think that they have a role to play. My comment to anybody saying, I don't feel that I'm adding any value or that I'm having that authority, if you want, to make a change, then I think they're looking at the wrong things. Again, this may surprise a few, but you are making an impact. And sometimes you just have to understand what that impact is. Either you're leading the relationship you have with the customer, you're leading those who are having that relationship. You're whether you're a frontline or middle management or senior management or C-level, or you're sitting on the board, or are the driver who delivers the food, or what. Especially in this time, show me anybody who's doing anything that doesn't add value. And again, this is where the network analogy comes up really strong. You can't be productive without everybody fully understanding and appreciating and taking their job very seriously. And look at this example from the hospital being operational depends on everything that happens way outside the hospital. The electricity coming in, to the food being delivered on time, to the cleaning crew doing their job, all these things that happen have that connection. So again, and this is also, I can appreciate being a very optimistic view. I do think change and leadership is a matter of personal perspective and how you look at things yourself. And so if you don't believe you had that power, I don't think anybody will give you that. No title for that matter, or even staff to work for you will change that. This is to me about, do you see yourself being in that leadership position or not? And then yes, there will always be those situations where your empowerment has limits, and sometimes the limit is the industry itself. The industry may not be ready for what you're trying to implement, but that doesn't mean you can't do anything about it. That doesn't mean you can't be a disruptor of what needs to happen within that industry or that team or within your family. So we can talk about all these examples and analogies, but the point is, I think it starts from within and how you can actually start working on it.
I'm so with you on that. Everything starts with the mindset, our perspective, how we look at it. You raised so many great points in that. You raised a point about network. We're all part of the network. We're all part of that value chain. Once one part is broken, it breaks the rest. So we all play a critical role. And it's really about how we see the role we play and the difference we're making in that role we play. I usually say we're part of a whole, and we all contribute towards the goodness of the entire being and the entire universe.
We are. And I think, again, on that similar point, and bringing it back to this crisis, bringing it back to what we do, I think this is the time to be reflective on that. And a lot of us were forced to that, right? Staying at home for a long time forces the mind to start thinking. The only thing I keep talking about often is about, sometimes the brain pushes us to think of limitations and the things we can't control, the things we can't do. And somehow that's what we really want to focus on. The example of the news talking about all these uncertainties in the world, which I agree are out there. But I think what's lacking sometimes is pushing our brain to the area of possibilities.
I love
and
that.
You'll resonate with this, being a change expert yourself. The notion of, you can look at it as you're being stranded in your home, forced to stay at home, or you can look at it as you're there to help save lives. And that's what we all are doing. This is not about just our own safety, it's the safety of everybody else.
Exactly.
The second is, you can look at it as you're within four walls, or that opens up a lot of possibilities for all these I'll get to it one day projects, or get to it one day, or I'll get to it someday books that we all wanted to get to at some point. Just think of all these possibilities and the things you can do.
I love that.
And so again, it's the mindset, and I think you said it really well. It's where do you want to put the energy in your brain and the electricity in your brain? Where do you want to direct it? Do you want to go to the worrisome side of the house of, oh my gosh, I may never leave the house again type of things? Or do you want to go back into, it is what it is, I'm doing something good for myself and my community. What can I do to come out of this better, stronger? And I think opening up slightly that possibility faucet, you'll see it's going to flow. It's going to start flowing, and you start one small thing, and suddenly it lead up to. I had a colleague who almost learned a new language in the last 2.5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And I asked them, like, how? They're like, I don't watch the news. And so they had to make that change of stopping their brain to be consumed by all these negative things going on, and literally just dedicated 45 minutes a day, of which they gained back from their commute, to learning a new language. And they're like, I'm almost there. I feel like I'm making some progress. And the point is, the brain likes breadcrumbs in terms of possibilities. Give it one, it's going to follow the next.
Exactly. And I think that's a great note to really end on, because it all comes down to the power is within us. It may not feel like that when we see everything happening in the world, but the power is within us to do what it is we need to do, how we need to do. But I think one thing I will personally take away from this is values. The values and the culture we create is what is going to help us lead in a time of crisis. The value and culture we create is what is revealed in a time of crisis. And it's also what will see us through, even in the disruptive times we're living in, for the fourth industrial revolution, AI, robotics, and even the fifth industrial revolution.
It is, yeah.
It's all about the values that we create as leaders in our organizations or in our space of influence. This has really been a great conversation, and I'm glad I'm connected with you, but I'm sure there's some people there that may want to connect with you. What's the best way? Twitter, LinkedIn?
Either way, Twitter, LinkedIn, or honestly, just reach out directly. I think you'll have my contacts anyway. I'm always happy and look forward to new conversations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time with us today. And I'm looking forward to having you at our 2021 conference.
I know. Hopefully everything is sorted out by then, right?
Yes. Fingers crossed, because we had some exciting stuff planned for that. So I'm looking forward to that element as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
For being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.